Okay. Can everyone hear me all right? That's lovely. Thank you very much. Good. So for the talk today, I'm going to use an extract from this book called The Wisdom of the Zen Masters, which is a compilation of stories, sayings, and bits of scripture and so forth that was compiled by my own late teacher, Venerable Myokyoni. And for today's, this is passage concerns a Zen master called Sokean, who lived in New York, in fact, in the 1930s, originally in the early part of the 20th century. His teacher, along with a group of other monks and Sokean, went over to America in order, really, because there had been some interest shown in Buddhism in that first part of the 20th century. And they really were just going to find out a little bit about America, about, if people were actually interested in the Dharma and whether they wanted to learn it and to practice it. And they went over there. They weren't there for very long, and it actually didn't go terribly well for them. And so they returned back to Japan. But Sokean's master told him to stay in America because he had detected that there was some interest. But he said, before you can teach people, it's important that you get to know the soul of the place and you get to know the people and what makes them tick. So he told him that he couldn't teach for 10 years, but that he should literally just wander around the country for 10 years, which is what he did. And in the end, he settled in New York, in Greenwich Village. And there in the 30s, he opened a Zendo, a small Zen group, Zen Buddhist group. And there he, with lay men and lay women, he taught them until the outbreak of the Second World War, when he was interned. He was released, obviously, after the Second World War, but he only survived for a couple of years after that, and then he died in the late 1940s. So this particular quote comes from Master Sokean. Master Sokean, who lived half of his life in the United States, stated humorously, "If you are in a powerful car in the middle of the Gobi Desert, you can step on the gas pedal and go any speed you like, any direction you fancy. But if you are in New York at a busy Broadway crossing, you better look out for the traffic lights." This is a quote that I rather like, and of course the title of this talk is "The Shape of Meditation," because actually what I want to talk about today is what we call form. The form of things. And this is something that's very important, particularly in Chinese Buddhism. As I'm sure many of you know, before Buddhism came into China, round about the 1st century AD, there was already, a number of powerful religions operating in China. Confucianism, obviously. Confucius was the contemporary of the Buddha, about 500 BC. But there was also Taoism as well. And there was a great deal of affinity between Taoism and Buddhism. And in fact, in China, in many of the writings of the Chinese Buddhist patriarchs, they often use the term Dharma, which call for the Buddha's teachings, and the Tao. They often use them interchangeably. Although strictly speaking, in fact, the Tao actually does have a different meaning, slightly different meaning to the Tao. But it's certainly true that Taoism did have a great influence on Buddhism, and therefore it certainly did on my own school, which is Zen, which I'm sure many of you probably know that already. One of the reasons that Taoism and Buddhism were so rubbing shoulders, so to speak, was very much because of their conception of nature and this idea that actually in nature, of which human beings are very much a part. There's no sort of man-made and natural. Everything is just part of nature. That the important thing is to be in alignment with nature, that there's a certain harmony, if you like, that exists throughout the whole of nature, and including in humanity as well, in human beings as well. And that when Buddhism came through to China, they recognized this in the word, the Dharma. Now, I'm sure, as you know, the term Buddha Dharma can be used to mean the Buddha's teachings, like the Four Noble Truths and the Three Signs of Being, and the Noble Eightfold Path and the Paramitas and Shunyata and all the rest of it. But it can also have a more transcendental meaning as well. The Dharma can also refer to the inherent law, as it's called, of the universe. And this term law is not a legalistic law, although there is a sort of overlapping. This law is more akin to the nature of things. When the Dharma is referred to in Buddhism, when it's said, for example, that all things are expressions of the Dharma itself becomes very similar to that notion of the nature of something. And when we use the English term nature, that term nature can mean two things. It can mean things like trees and mountains and streams and birds and evolution and, birth and death and all those things as well. All the things in nature that we can see, in other words. But we also use it to mean the nature of something, don't we? So for example, if we talk about, the nature of a dog is to chase a cat, and the nature of a cat is to chase a bird, and that sort of thing, we know what we're talking about. And if, for example, if I've got a cat, as I've mentioned before, if I come back with the shopping, for example, and I've bought, say, some wet fish or something like that, and I put the shopping down in the kitchen, and then my phone goes, and it's someone who I've not spoken to for ages, and I wander off through to the living room, and I have a conversation for 3/4 of an hour as we catch up, and then I go back to the kitchen, and there one of the shopping bags is on its side with all the stuff been pulled out, and the plastic bag with the wet fish in it has been ripped open. There's no wet fish now, and my cat is sat there licking his lips, looking quite literally like he's got the cream. Well, I mean, who's to blame for that? Can I really blame the cat? Cats and fish go together. It's, as we know, it's the nature of a cat to do that sort of thing. And so I can't really blame anybody but myself. As a human being, it's my nature to realize those things, because the Dharma's given us brains to use, and if I don't use them or I'm negligent, then really I can't blame the cat, can I? And so when we talk about things having a nature, we're referring to something that you cannot see directly necessarily. When we talk about the nature of a cat, you cannot directly see the nature of a cat, but the cat itself expresses that nature. So the nature of a cat is to do what cats do, and the nature of a dog is to do what dogs do. And this is also why this term Tao can also mean the way. So there is a way of a cat, and that way is its nature. And there is a way of a dog, and that's the dog nature. And there's a way of an oak tree, and that's the oak tree's nature. And the cherry tree blossoms in spring and it produces fruit in autumn. That is the nature of the cherry tree. That is the way of the cherry tree. And this term Dharma, the way of things, or the inherent law, or the inherent nature of something, and the Tao, the way of things, are very closely aligned. So when we talk about form, or the forms of things, what we are talking about is the expression of something, the way that the inner nature that may not be seen directly, the way it expresses itself is through the form of the thing. So we have nature, or essence, and we also, which is an inward thing that you cannot see directly, but you also have the outward expression of it, which is the form. Now, in the Mahayana, in the Mahayana teachings, there's a sutra known as the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And this is the sutra of the Buddha's enlightenment in the Northern or Mahayana tradition. Now, when the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, as you know, he sat for a week, and then on the morning of the 8th day, he looked up and saw the morning star, and he awoke and became the Buddha, which is what Buddha means. It's a title meaning the awakened one. He had awoken to the Dharma. He had awoken to the true nature of things. He had awoken to his own Buddha nature, which he saw, which is the same as the nature of all beings and all things, in fact. And he awoke to that truth. He realized that truth. Now, in the Southern tradition, which the Theravadan is more inclined, it said that the first words of the Buddha were, "Now I have seen you, builder of the house. The ridgepole is broken. Never again will you build your houses." And this refers to that he had seen into the teaching of Anatman, or anatta, or no I. He had seen that the self actually is a delusion. These are the houses that he was referring to, and he had now seen the builder of the house, realized that the true nature is in fact empty of all self nature, and thus his suffering had come to an end, and there would be no more rebirths either. But in the Northern tradition, the story is slightly different. In the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, it says that his first words on his awakening is, "How wonderful, how miraculous. All beings, but all beings, are fully and completely endowed with the wisdom," that's the clarity of seeing, the realization or the enlightenment, and the warmth of heart, or the power, of the Tathagata, Tathagata being another name of the Buddha. So how wonderful, how miraculous. All beings have the Buddha's wisdom and power. But alas, because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it. So it looks to be something slightly different from the Southern tradition, but actually it's not so different. But it has does have a different emphasis. And we have this notion again of the Buddha nature, which in fact the Chinese developed this teaching of the Buddha nature, and that really is, if you like, the one of the great heights of Chinese Buddhism. This notion, and as a result of this, this saying that all beings are fully endowed with the Buddha nature, that in other words, the Buddha nature is already operating in all beings, and that harmony that is, that I've alluded to already, that's there in the meaning of the word the Dharma or the Tao, is an expression of that Buddha nature. And that therefore, when everything is going well, all things are in harmony with each other. But because of their sticky attachments, and this is the second half of what the Buddha said, because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of this harmony. And therefore, we are out of harmony. And because we are out of harmony, we suffer as a result. So Chinese religion, and not just Chinese religion, this is actually very common in Eastern religions in general. Its salvation comes through getting back into harmony with this Buddha nature, getting back into harmony with this nature, with one's own nature. And this is why realizing one's Buddha nature and the end of suffering are synonymous. Because when one realizes one's own nature, one is immediately back in harmony with it. And being back in harmony with it, then the suffering of samsara by that point then comes to an end. And there is what Master Torre, another Zen master who lived in the 18th century, he said at that point there is a different life, or a new era of life is embarked upon when that realization actually happens. So these are just a few of the important things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about the form of things. Now, going back to what the Buddha said, all beings already are fully and completely endowed with the wisdom and power. And as I said before, a cat because it lives out of its nature quite unconsciously, is in all circumstances, good, bad, and indifferent, a cat. And a dog, in all circumstances, good, bad, and indifferent, is always a dog. But human beings can also, because we are out of kilter, because we do not realize our own the human form of the Buddha nature always, we can also fall into other states, non-human states. And these are the 6 states that we see on the Wheel of Life. Now, hopefully you're familiar with the Wheel of Life with its 6 states. There are 5 non-human states. There's the gods, the fighting demons, the animals, the hell beings, and the hungry ghosts. And only one of those states is human. And basically, if we take those 6 states as a psychological map, then these are the 6 states that we can be born into any day, any time of day throughout our lives. And if we are practicing meditation, and if we're practicing our mindfulness practice, then we will know that there are times when we are not in our human sense, and we are not in that sort of human consciousness. And it's very interesting because what this reminds us is that the conception of what it is to be human in the West and also in Eastern religions are in fact very different. So in the West, to be human is to be flawed because we were born in sin, according to our own religious mythology. We are, to err is human, isn't it? We say, oh, well, what do you expect? I'm only human. So we use it as an excuse when, in fact, we are not behaving in a very human way. In the East, actually, humanness is something that we're not automatically born into. We have to aspire to it. We actually have to train ourselves to become human because we have a tendency to be reborn in one of the non-human states. And I'm talking about our current life. I'm not talking about life after life at this point. I'm just talking because, as we know, the Wheel of Life exists not just life to life to life, but it exists moment to moment to moment. There's death. This consciousness that we have can die. And then in the next moment, another consciousness can be reborn. Here I am talking to you, looking like butter wouldn't melt in my mouth. This time tomorrow, I could be having a fighting demon row with somebody, who upset me or whatever, or maybe not even a row, but I could be thinking angry thoughts, about how I wasn't treated fairly, or someone pushed in front of me in the queue, and and all this sort of thing. And I've fallen out of that human state, and I've fallen into the fighting demons, or into the hungry ghosts if I want something, or if I'm really miserable. I've got a bit of a toothache at the moment, and I'm going to see the dentist tomorrow. But what happens if it gets cancelled? What happens if there's something happens and he has to close and I can't see him? And then I have to put up with this pain. And then tomorrow night, I'm really miserable. I'm in the hell realms because I have this toothache and there's nothing I can do with it until the dentist can actually see me. And so we transmigrate through these realms. But every so often we are born into that human realm. And this reminds us that actually our consciousness is layered. There are different layers to our consciousness. There's a consciousness, some of our consciousness near the surface is much newer in a sort of chronology, and other depths of consciousness in our own heart are much older and are, in fact, they predate our humanity. They actually come from our non-human ancestors, because we mustn't forget that we carry their blood, we carry their DNA, we carry their karma in us too. And this is the again, as my late teacher used to like to say, if you go back to the primordial forest, long before humanity, long before where those huge creatures were lumbering through. And of course, in the forest, you can't see very far in front of you because there's trees and there's creepers and things. And, one of those huge creatures sort of breaks through into a clearing in the forest. And at the same time, on the other side of the clearing, another large creature comes breaking through into the clearing. And they literally bump noses. And in doing so, the first law of the jungle says, if you can, run away, because we're both those creatures have weapons of mass destruction. They have big teeth and claws, and the less you use them, the more likely you are going to survive. So the first law of the jungle is run away. But of course, if you bump noses, if you're too close together, then to run away means to turn to your side, and that exposes your vulnerable flank to the weapons, of teeth and claws that are there from the other one. Now, when you're too close together to run away, the second law of the jungle applies, and the second law is this: the one that hits out first is more likely to walk away alive. We are the descendants of those that survived, and that impulse is in all of us. Now, we roll that forward, and what we discovered through a process of evolution is that you can survive even better if you form a group. But in order to form a group and protect each other and look after each other, which is much more advantageous, those impulses to hit out when something doesn't suit me don't work. You can't keep a community together like that. So there is a thin veneer on top of socialization that allows us to work together. But of course, that deep impulse is still there underneath all that. So, if I'm getting onto a bus or something like that, and some school kid runs off and stamps on my foot accidentally, I don't want to appear, even though I feel aggrieved, I don't want to appear short-tempered and nasty. I can see that it was a bit inelegant, but I don't yell or hit out or punch or something like that. But it comes up, doesn't it? Something very hot snorts up inside at that moment. And of course, this is now where the Buddha said, because of those sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it. What are those sticky attachments? Well, the primordial sticky attachment is to myself. This is Buddhism. And the fundamental delusion that has to be seen through is this self, is this attachment to the notion of myself. So all these impulses, what I want, the desire to get hold of things, the desire to protect and security and so forth, all these things now are tied to this false notion of myself. And this is basically what the Buddha is talking about in the Four Noble Truths as well. And so this is why that emotional bundle, that bundle of emotionality, becomes very much tied up with my ego, with what I want and what I don't want, what I like and what I don't like. And this is why my opinions also become extremely heated as well, because doesn't it feel, I mean, if I'm somewhere and someone is expressing opinion that's diametrically opposed to mine, and I can feel myself reacting, there's something sort of coming up, that heat comes up inside me, that aggression comes up inside me, because in a way it feels like I am under attack, doesn't it? If I'm honest, if I say this is what I think, and then someone says, well, actually, I don't think that's right, I feel attacked. It's difficult not to, even though I may see myself as a very reasonable person. And I remember someone I know in the London group that I go to, who had been doing this practice for about 18 months. And he came up to me once and he said, Martin, I always thought of myself as quite a sort of laid back, tolerant sort of, liberal chap, he said. But I've realized over the past 6 months, I'm actually quite a bigot. not in the usual way. He said, but I get quite intolerant of other people if they voice certain opinions that I don't go along with. He said, I really do react to that. And these things we often keep from us. These things we don't necessarily like to see about myself, because I do like to think that I'm reasonably good, reasonably tolerant, reasonably fair-minded with all those things. It's a nice picture that I have. And these impulses that are much deeper, of course, don't look so good, don't make me look so good. And so I don't like to look at them too closely. And of course, the thing is, though, we have to ask ourselves with this nature, of course, because all these things, those two lumbering beasts, and also the early humans who were socializing together, etc., we have to ask ourselves, what is the nature of those beings that as it were evolves or expresses itself in these different ways. And this is the thing about the nature of things, the Buddha nature itself. It is often said that the Buddha nature itself has no form, and therefore it can become any form when the circumstances require it. So often the analogies that are given is that the Buddha nature is like water, for example. It takes the shape of the vessel into which it's poured. Water itself has no shape to it, but it takes the shape of whatever vessel that it's poured into. And that's where its usefulness comes from as well, of course. And so it is with the Buddha nature as well. So the fact that we have evolved a humanity means that the Buddha nature has poured itself into this form, into this human form, and the Buddha nature expresses itself through this human form as well. Now, the other thing that's interesting to note, going back to what the Buddha said, again, we're still looking at this form and essence, when he said all beings have the Buddha nature, is that there are certain differences between the human species and all the other species on the planet. One of the big differences, of course, is that we have ethical codes, and we have legal codes, and we have courts of law, and we have enforcement agencies as well. We're the only species on this planet that have these things. And that shows something. If you step back from that, and you may sort of think, I mean, we're not even allowed to arm ourselves. I mean, I know they do in America, but we don't. But here in Britain, we're not allowed to carry around guns and knives. I know some people do, but we're not actually allowed to do it because we're not really trusted. But you look at your cat or your dog; they carry their weapons around with them everywhere that they go, because obviously they're part of their bodies, and you can't disarm a cat, and you can't disarm a dog, or you can't disarm a bee, etc. But the curious thing is that they don't just go berserk willy-nilly. You don't get massacres carried out by a dog. I know a fox in a chicken coop might be considered as can be a bit of a massacre. But actually, there's an awful lot of restraint that's practiced by animals. And if I mean, those natural history programs with David Attenborough on are often very popular. And he's often looking at sort of, species behavior. And even if you look at, say, the lions, for example, and, you have a lion, a male lion, and there will be a pride of female lions, and there'll be the cubs as well, and he is very possessive. He's always on the lookout for other males that might come and challenge him, and every so often one does, and the male will come up, and they go through this choreography, where the two males will square up to each other. And, if it's obvious that one of the lions is smaller than the other, then there's no fight. The smaller one just goes away. There's no fight. If they're equal size, then they may growl at each other. And the reason that they do that is they're showing their teeth. They're saying, look at my weapons. if that might settle it, in which case there's no fight. If there is a confrontation, if there is actually a fight, it's over pretty quickly. And that's because it has to be. If you've got big teeth and big claws, you cannot have, berserkers. You cannot have just wanton warfare, because nature would have just weeded you out. The species just wouldn't survive. So it's over very quickly. But what's fascinating is that there are no rules. There's no ethical code. There's no law enforcement agency. But yet everybody knows and everybody follows this dance, follows this choreography. And that's because it arises out of the nature of the lions themselves. That's why they do it. When it comes to human beings, we also have that nature. And perhaps now we can begin to see where this is going. When the Buddha said, alas, because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it. In other words, human beings are not informed by the Buddha nature because we're not aware of it. Whereas the lions are informed by their own lion nature of how to confront and how to fight, when to start and when to stop, we don't. We don't. This is what's known as instinct crossing in biology. It's the reason why, a lion, after it's full, it's the instinct to eat is crossed, and that hunger goes down, and the lion obeys the hunger. If the lion becomes hungry, it obeys the hunger and it goes and hunts. And when it's eaten, it stops hunting. And in fact, zebra and gazelle can walk right past the lions. If they're not hunting, they're quite safe because their instincts, the hunting instinct, doesn't just lash out. It's not impulsive in the way that we think of our own behavior when it is impulsive. How we will eat when we're hungry, but we'll eat when we're sad. We'll eat when we're stressed. We'll eat because we're bored. We might eat for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with hunger, or smoke, or drink, or gamble, or go and have a row. Not because we might have a row, because we're bored and we're frustrated and we just take it out on whoever's nearest to us. I mean, if we're acting blindly in this way, impulsively in this way, then we are not actually obeying our instincts. We are warping them in accordance with the ego, with my own wishes, with my own happiness, my own upset, my own frustrations. It's all about me. And this is why the Buddha said, because of the sticky attachment to I, human beings are not aware of the natural arising and passing away, the functioning of the Buddha nature. There's another interesting difference between ourselves and other animals as well. And that is that not only do we have ethics and precepts and laws and all this sort of thing, we also have philosophy. And other species don't. Other species do not sit wondering, what is the all about? What's the meaning of it all? These are, again, concerns that come to us. And again, this is because the Buddha nature, because the Buddha nature of things is expressed unconsciously through animals. But because we are out of sorts and we are misaligned with our own nature, we are not informed of our meaning. Because the meaning of our lives, of course, arises from our nature anyway. It arises from our humanity. It's our humanity that informs us. And so because we do not obey this inner essence, we then have to create laws and create ethical codes and impose them on ourselves from the outside. But the Buddha was very clear that actually the precepts are simply expressions of our human nature already. The only reason that they appear to come to us from the outside, imposed outside in, so to speak, instead of inside out, as it would be with those two lions, they appears outside in because we cannot see it directly in ourselves. And again, this brings us back to that wheel of life with its 6 realms, those 5 non-human ones, those 5 non-human ways of acting and being in the world, and the one that is human. And this is why I said that in the East, and certainly in Buddhism, and the Buddha himself said, from the human form only, or the human shape only, is liberation possible. And he didn't just mean being born with a human body. He meant consciousness, that our human consciousness, which is the inward, has to be aligned with the outer humanness of our form. When those two things are aligned, then we are truly body, but we're human in mind and in heart as well. And what is it then, that human state? Well, it is what we know to be the best of humanity, to be the best that we can be. And really, again, if you look at the stories that people talk about, and even the things we look up to as well. I know one of the exercises that I do, a course that I've taken at the Buddhist Society, First Footsteps in Buddhist Practice, and we do an exercise on the wheel of life, identifying those states of consciousness in ourselves, the hungry ghosts and the fighting demons, etc. And when it comes to identifying what it is to be human, actually, you can think in terms of who are your heroes? Who are your heroes, or who are your heroines? And I get people to sort of say, who do you think is a hero? And it might be, I don't know, it might be a sports athlete, it might be the Buddha, it might be Jesus, it might be, somebody from history, maybe Winston Churchill or Nelson Mandela or something like that. And then I always sort of say, what is it about that person that makes them a hero in your eyes? And people might say courage, or selflessness, or being able to lay one's life down for the benefit of the greater humanity, or something like that. But these are qualities that we naturally are moved by, aren't we? Because that's why they're heroic. That's why we call them heroic, because they stir us. When we see bravery, and maybe we think, gosh, could I do that? I don't know whether I could. Edmund Hillary went to the top of Mount Everest. Could I do that? Oh God, no. But I really respect him for doing that, for having that tenacity and that sheer determination. So it would be something like, patience, or constancy, or determination, or bravery. These are qualities that we naturally look up to. And it's these qualities that we recognize in others and in ourselves as well as being fine and ennobling. And remember that, the Sanskrit term for the arhats, the term arhat itself comes from Arya, meaning the noble ones. And Arya is not something that you're born with. It's something that's developed. It's ennobling. And so the human form in Buddhism, and also in Chinese religion as well, is something that we aspire to. We are ennobled by it. Our nature, our true nature, is ennobling, and therefore coming into the realization of our own nature in itself is a path that ennobles us. And that's why when we're walking the Buddhist path, we're walking the path of meditation, of course. We're walking the path of human conduct, proper human conduct. This is the behavior, the speech, and the behavior, at least, that we all know is the best, is the most human. And also there is the wisdom as well. The recognition that the reason that we do these two other things, the meditation and the ethical living, is that they are expressions of our inherent nature. And they will, by living in this way, we can begin to recognize our true humanity. And it's at that point that we begin to recognize also that those rules are not outside us. They are actually expressions of our own heart too. And this is what I mean by the shape of meditation. This is what I mean when I talk about the forms of things. And so going back to this, then we have what we have here is Master Sokeam talking about these two scenarios. Here we are. Here we have somebody in a big, powerful car in the middle of the Gobi Desert, and in those circumstances, you can put your foot down and you can go in any direction at any speed that you absolutely like. But if you're living in a busy city like New York, then there are rules that have to be obeyed as well. There's the highway code and all those sorts of things that the American equivalent, obviously, of how to drive a car in a busy city. And what he's showing is that the good human is able to adapt to the differing circumstances. Now, the reason that I say this is that sometimes, because of the grasping nature of self, we can, even with rules, for example, we can grasp at those rules and simply want to apply them, in all circumstances. And I can give you just a simple little example of it. When I used to live in the temple, when we used to pour tea or coffee, we always put the tea in first and then the milk in afterwards. Okay. Now, when I was brought up, I always put the milk in first and then poured the tea on top. That's sort of been the English way, I think. But my teacher, she was Austrian, and that was just the way they did it. And she brought that into the temple, and that was the way it was done. And so that was the way we did it. But there was a guy who was living at the temple for a time, and he went to see a friend of his, and she made him a cup of tea. And of course, she put the milk in first. And he said, no, that's not the right way to do it. He said, you must pour the tea in first and then put the milk in. Well, she was a bit nonplussed about this, as this was her own home, and you can see why. And when he came back to the temple, and he sort of a little bit self-righteously, and he was just, he was a little bit sort of, slightly rule-bound, one of those sort of people who's a little bit rule-bound. That was his own particular attachment. When he came back and said this, the teacher really turned on him, and she said, you must never do that. That was rude. Can you not see that that was rude? But he couldn't. All he could see was that he was right. And that's where the wisdom comes in as well. And that's where the danger comes, of course, with the rules as well. And why all those stories, as I know you have it in Tibetan Buddhism, we have it in Zen too, that once the realization is there, then of course you no longer have to follow the rules. But that doesn't mean that you abandon ethics. It's simply that you no longer have to follow an outer system, because that is already reflecting your own heart, and it would just never occur to you to behave differently. And there's a nice story actually from the Buddha's time of when the Buddha was towards the end of his life. And of course, there was his great disciple, Mahakasyapa, who would become the first patriarch after him. And Mahakasyapa was known for being a really strict disciplinarian. And he used to live in he had a very thin robe, and he would live, quite a way in the forest away from the village where they would go on their daily alms round. And one day the Buddha came and visited Mahakasyapa. And after the usual sort of pleasantries, he said, Mahakasyapa, both of us are getting on. And we've lived this life now, and we've clearly, the discipline is there and it's absolutely solid, and we are, in our human form. He said no one would think any the worse if you were to get a slightly thicker robe in winter when it's cold. And if you were to move your hut a little bit closer to the town so you don't have so far to walk for your alms round, then, that would be absolutely fine as well. Mahakasyapa said, Lord, he said, if this is what you want me to do, then of course I will do it. No question. He said, but if you are giving me the choice, he said, I am so used to this way of living that it fits me like an old coat. He said, and I actually would prefer just to stick with my habits as they are. And the Buddha said, yeah, absolutely, Mahakasyapa. Whatever you prefer, that's no problem at all. You just carry on. So with this, you see, Mahakasyapa did not see himself as a strict disciplinarian, whereas other people did. This was his life, and he was quite comfortable with that way of living. He knew there was nothing, he wasn't telling himself, I must do this, otherwise God will punish me, or I must do this, otherwise I will let the Buddha down, or something like that, or what would other people think, or not at all. This had become quite natural to him. It was now this out of form, this outer shape of the life that he was living fully reflected his own nature. And it's a fascinating thing because obviously he could adapt, rather like Sokyan, rather like the example Sokyan's giving. If you're in the Gobi Desert, you can do what the heck you like. It doesn't matter. But if you're in New York, you can peacefully go along with that as well without getting rubbed up the wrong way. Notice that he did say, Lord, if this is what you would like, then of course I will do it. He was fully, he had that obedience, he had that adaptability that the life of obedience had given him, which was also something that came very naturally to him. Obedience is a term we don't like now. We think of it as a sort of terrible form of oppression and so forth. And of course, yes, it can be misused, but it does have a very valid function as well, certainly in spiritual training as well. And in fact, without obedience and also its sister discipline as well, it simply won't. The spiritual training cannot go anyway, as we know. In fact, many things can't go. So that expression of one's own nature. But the other thing to say of it is that it's not necessarily what I like either. That there's a difference, and not to conflate one's true nature with what I like and what I don't like. Quite often, in fact, things that I like and don't like are not expressions of my own nature. And again, I remember the story that again my late teacher said when she was training in Japan. So she was a woman, obviously, and she was training in a male monastery, but she couldn't live in the monastery, obviously. And she was a lay woman anyway. So she lived outside, but she would go first thing in the morning, and the first sitting started at 4:30 in the morning. So it was very early. And she would work, and then she would leave, and then she would go to work and come back in the evening as well. She had always said, throughout her life, she said, the one thing that I really felt that I couldn't live without was music. She said it was, I loved music, and she was brought up with music, and I felt I really couldn't live without it. And, there were other Westerners there, and obviously they knew each other, and, they shared similar interests. And she had a friend who said, I can get 2 tickets for a concert that's going to be on in next month. Do you want me to get you a ticket? Yes. Said, please get me a ticket. And so she would get a ticket. And then she always found, as she got closer and closer to the time, she became more and more unwilling and more reluctant, thinking, oh, I wish I hadn't said yes now. And she found herself coming up with reasons not to go. And she did this, she said, about 2 or 3 times, when it dawned on her that it was pretty obvious. If she had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to make it to the temple for 4:30, and then she had to work a full day, she didn't want to be getting home at 11:30 at night from a cold and drafty music venue, So obviously she didn't want to, and she recognized that. And so in the end, she stopped going. In the end, she turned those tickets down and said, no, no more. However, what she did discover was that come rain or shine, she would always fit into her daily routine a half-hour walk. And she said she never realized until that moment that when the chips are down, she could let go of music. But the walk really felt essential, and that stayed. And she said, it's just an example. She said, you discover these things in hindsight. You think you know who you are, but you discover in hindsight that actually even your own tastes may not be quite what you consciously think they are. And just to finish off with, I want to just tell a story from my own, which have told before. But when I was a child, I lived by the seaside, and occasionally during the summer holidays, my brother used to have to take me with him. My brother's 4 years older than me, and when he was 14 and I was 10, that's a big age difference. And my mother used to force him to take me with his friends, you see, and they used to go fishing by the sea, and so I would get sort of trail along with them, and so he would give me the nasty job of baiting the hooks, and they would bait the hooks with these mussels, you see, which which were horrible. They used to have been sitting under the hot lights in the fishing tackle shop, and by the time it came to lunchtime, my fingers were dyed that orange yellow color, that orangey color that mussels have, and the stench of I couldn't get it off. And when I tried to eat my sandwich, all I could smell was this smell of mussels. And from that day forward, I could never look a mussel in the face again. And then, of course, mussels became all the thing to eat in the 1980s. When you went to restaurants, people would have them. And every time someone at a table that I was at would have these mussels, I would trot out that same story. And then just before the turn of the 21st century, I was with a friend who had invited me out for something to eat, and he ordered mussels, and I told him this story, and literally out of nowhere, and I said, I couldn't eat a mussel. It's disgusting. And literally out of nowhere, I just thought, I wonder. So I said, do you mind if I try one? And he said, no. So I gave me a mussel. I stuck the fork in, and I put it in my mouth, and I chewed it, and I swallowed it. Now, whilst I wouldn't say it was my favorite food, it didn't make me throw up. I didn't spit it out in revulsion. And that suddenly made me realize that actually my own tastes had changed, and that what I thought my tastes were was no longer true. So I just want to point that out, because we tell these stories in our heads. Oh, I must have those 2 cups of coffee, otherwise I simply can't function. Or I must get 8 hours sleep a night, otherwise, I'm not fit for man the beast or whatever. But actually, the whole point of the training, and when we go on retreats and so forth, is that the discipline pushes us beyond what I think I can do. And when we step over that boundary of what I think I can do, then that self-image that is actually a restraining image has a chance to fall down. It has a chance to be burst, if you like, to be smashed even, and that we can see and suddenly recognize that actually I don't have to feel frightened of not getting what I want, or I don't have to feel anxious about such, and that I'll be all right, and that this will be okay. And yes, it may be uncomfortable, and yes, it may be unpleasant, but it's okay. I've felt unpleasant before and survived. I've been uncomfortable before and frustrated before, and it was okay. It changed. I got out of it, and things carried on. I've fallen over before. It's okay. You can still get up and continue. It's not the end of the world, even though I'm convinced that it will be the end of the world. So these are the sticky attachments of I that the Buddha was talking about, and that prevents us from realizing that true nature, the Buddha nature, as it manifests itself through this human form, which is in the end our true shape. Okay, well, I'll leave it there, and yeah, so I think what we'll do, we'll just have a few minutes, I think, quiet sitting, and then we can finish off with if anyone's got any questions or comments, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. So if anybody has any questions or any comments or whatever, you can just unmute yourself and just say, or put it in the chat if you don't want to speak.
Well, Martin, I'll thank you. No one seems to be coming forward, but The Shape of Water, The Shape of Meditation, very good. And I've never seen that film, The Shape of Water.
No, I haven't either,
There is a film, but
actually. It's supposed to be very good.
maybe investigate that now. But thank you yet again.
Pleasure.
Maybe in May, something like that again.
Okay.
Return. If
We've got a couple of bank holidays in that month, so
Okay.
let's sort of see. But
we'll
yes,
see how it goes. Well, I'll be in touch. And
yeah.
Thank you very much again.
Not at all. Not at all. All right. Yes.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye bye.